It was a bit anticlimactic. We had a big discussion and then decided to decide later. So we're going to incorporate that into the budget discussions that will be happening in 3 weeks' time at the end of this month to make a decision on whether to move forward. But administration's recommendation is to close those pools on December 31st.
What could possibly happen in the next 2 weeks that could change that?
I don't know that anything will happen to change the recommendation. I think what will happen is council just has to make decisions, right? You know, is it worth this amount of money to provide rec facilities for people in the inner city? You know, we make these decisions every day on where we're going to invest our funds and what kinds of services we're going to invest them in. And really, council just has to come to terms with that. And what I heard from committee today is that there are some different points of view on whether this is a good use of public money or not. And that's really an appropriate conversation to have at the budget.
Can you clarify what exactly is the difference between running them and keeping them closed? And
Right now, they cost about 1.2 million per year tax funds to operate them. That's after people's fees and whatever. Excuse me. So, to run those buildings, even if nothing's going on in them, to keep out the mice and keep the heat on and keep the pipes running, is $400,000 a year, which sounds crazy expensive to me. But that means that the net benefit of closing them financially, if nothing else happens in those buildings at all, is $800,000 a year.
How, you've got tough decisions to make in this budget, and if something like this bogs you down like that, how difficult a process are these budget adjustments going to be?
Oh, it's going to be hard. We're going to have a royal fight over what will account to $5 a month for the average house. And in fact, it'll probably be a royal fight over $250 a month to the average house, because I think everyone could probably agree on the first $250. That's just my guess. So it's not a ton of money, but they are critical decisions for how we operate and what we believe are important services that need to be maintained. You know, I have my own list of criteria. We must preserve services for the most vulnerable. We must preserve good transportation options for everybody. We must preserve investment in things that lead to healthier outcomes for people, like rec centers. Other members of council will have different criteria, and that is the discussion that we're going to have. What's really interesting is, we got a $4 billion with a B dollar budget, and we're going to be fighting about $50 million, right? It's a tiny portion of the whole budget. But the good news about that is that Calgarians can be assured that the vast majority of the services that they rely upon every day will continue.
How concerned are you? We had a bit of it in there that it's going to be war inner city versus suburbs, councillor versus councillor.
It ought not to be. There are legitimate questions to be raised. And, I think Councillor Woolley is raising a legit question. Look, my neighborhood is really growing, and we've taken out a police station. We're looking at taking out the only rec facility. We're looking at maybe removing some of the transit service in the future from that area. What's going on here? I think that's a legit question to ask, but I think it's also a legit question for others to ask when they say, well, we haven't had transit for 30 years, really good rapid transit in this area, so how do we do that? And fundamentally, that's what we always have to balance off, And for me, my job is to really, really try and balance off all neighborhoods. I'm a guy who lives in a neighborhood that touches the city limit, but I also spend time in every other neighborhood in the city and understand the importance of that vibrancy throughout.
I think one staff member said they've never decommissioned a pool before. Is this really something the city's never done before?
I actually don't know the answer to that question, but if they said it, it must be true. Because, of course, we've been so lucky in Calgary that we've always been growing, right? And the kinds of growth that we see every year is uncommon, actually, even as we see mass urbanization around the world. So as a result, we've always had people to use those facilities. What's really interesting about the Beltline facility in particular is that neighborhood really, really has been growing, but the usage of the facility has been declining. And that's something new for us and something for us to figure out.
Can you talk a little bit about those water rates? In particular, it looks like they should be increasing because we're having a shortfall in developer levies. What's the problem there? Why aren't we able to make growth for growth, which I believe is the city's policy?
How deep do you want me to go?
I'm happy to hear the whole thing. Yeah.
One of the reasons I ran for mayor is because I thought that we had a terribly broken system of how we were managing our debt and how we were building facilities for newer communities. And so when I became mayor, we agreed on a principle that growth should pay for itself. And certainly in the 2013 election and the 2017 election, this was a big issue. But everyone generally agreed, and council unanimously passed bylaws that said growth should pay for itself. So when I started in this job, about half of the city's debt was because we hadn't been charging developers anything for the water and wastewater connections to new communities. About $2 billion in debt, if memory serves. And we hadn't increased the water rates to pay for that debt, so the interest was just piling on. So when I first became mayor all those years ago, we increased water rates to start paying down the debt, and we changed the system so that we wouldn't incur the debt anymore. And in 2011, we changed it to developers will pay 50% of the cost of growth, and in 2016, it became 100%. The problem is we've never hit either 50% or 100%. We've got these shortfalls year after year after year. And this year, the shortfall was so big that administration is recommending increasing everyone's sewer rate, everyone's wastewater rate, by 6.5% in order to cover that shortfall. So clearly, we're not abiding by the principle that growth should pay for itself. And we've got to figure out a better way to do this, because otherwise everyone ends up paying.
And how do you justify all the new communities then with that?
You know, look, this is an important question, because when we had the discussion around the 14 new communities, we were having a big discussion around the operating budget. In other words, we're paying for the fire halls, but we got to figure out how to pay for the firefighters in those halls. We're paying for the water pipes. We got to figure out if we need to cover the cost of the water running through those pipes and so on. But what we're learning today is that in fact we're not even paying for the capital. So when council made the decision to increase everybody's taxes to cover the operating costs of those new communities, it didn't even touch the capital costs. But if we're learning that we're not actually collecting enough to pay for the capital, that's actually a very big problem.
So is that the problem, that the city didn't get themselves a good deal? The city wasn't smart enough to get a good deal?
No, the problem is that we relied on the markets and the industry's assurances of how much they were going to develop and how quickly. And they've developed every single year far less than they say they need in order for approvals, and that's something we've got to address.
So you're building all this stuff, but it's not being developed.
Well, we're approving it, and when we approve it, we have to build the wastewater, because when the first house goes in and the toilet flushes, it's got to go somewhere. But the problem is if no houses go in, now I've built all these pipes and this capacity in the wastewater plant, and there's nobody paying the water bills to pay for that.
The Fire Association has said that they're kind of upset with some of the new communities that were approved last year, and they really spoke to the most recent fire down in Legacy, where the nearest fire hall is about 12 minutes away. Where do you guys go with making sure there's enough resources in those new communities?
That's actually part of the discussion that we had last year around increasing everyone's taxes, was to make sure that over time we won't get into the situation we had in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, where it took years, if not decades, to get those facilities in place. So we'll be able to get them in place much more quickly, but it is important for people who are buying homes to understand exactly what's there and exactly what the timeline is to get more things, and figure out what risk they're willing to accept in the short term.
Where do you land on this BRT business? Do you think that BRT would be a good replacement solution or
Oh,
a way
boy.
of tackling our shortfall on cash at hand for the Greenway?
Let me take a deep breath, because that's a big one too. Originally, we had talked about building BRT both in the north and in the south. And what happened was we got a lot more money than we were expecting, $3 billion from the federal and provincial governments. We're never going to get that $3 billion again. And we know that LRT is needed at some point, especially on the north leg of the Green Line, because the BRT will be at capacity, as we learned in 2015, relatively quickly. If we transitioned the entire LRT panorama to seat into BRT, I guarantee you that $3 billion would go away. I cannot see the province or the federal government giving us that much money for a BRT project when it's so much more than BRT projects in other parts of the country and other parts of the province. So we could do it. We could probably do it with our own funds. I don't know what the numbers are, but I bet we could. The problem is that we're saying goodbye to $3 billion that we may never get again. So in my mind, I'd rather put that $3 billion to work. Now, I will say that we have made a mistake. Council has repeatedly said that even if phase one is in the south, there must be an interim solution for the north. and we've never been able to present an interim solution for the North. So I'm now at the point where I will not accept any Green Line solution that does not include interim phasing for the North, probably a BRT. I think that's really important, and it's important to happen now. Because we're getting congestion on the transit lines up there, as I've talked about for many, many years. I think we can still do the LRT Phase 1, as we've talked about, with some design changes, and I look forward to having that discussion on November 15th.
We're starting to hear numbers from other councillors in terms of what the budget shortfall might look like this year. One councillor said $70 million. I've heard about $52 million cut to operating budget. Are there concrete numbers out there? at this
Yeah,
time?
there sure are. Oh, do you want to know what they are?
Yes.
So, under the current plan, Council had approved a 3.02%, if memory serves, operating budget increase. To take that to zero is a cut of somewhat more than $50 million. Okay, 52, that's probably where that 52 comes from. But Council also spent all of the rebate money at once last year for the small businesses. That's $70 million. So, first of all, if Council wants to reduce the operating budget from 3 to something else, they've got to find that money. That's number one. Number two is if they want to soften the blow of the end of the rebate program to the one-time rebate program to small businesses, they'll have to find at least one-time money up to around $70 million. If they want to find base money up to $70 million to make that program permanent, that's an option open to them, but that's a lot of money.
Since there's some of the Green Line funding's in question, could you use the 1 year of the $52 million for PTP?
I wouldn't want to do that because I think that the 30 years of the $52 million is actually all required. It's all in the budget. So if we take it out today, I'm going to have to find $52 million plus interest on the other end. There may be other options for a continuation of the phase tax program. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.